Our next speaker, Guillaume Faye, is actually a schoolmate of mine. We both attended the Paris Institute of Political Studies, not quite at the same time. And Mr. Faye also holds a doctorate in political science from the Sorbonne. He's also one of the early activists in that important New Right movement in France known as Grèce. However, in 1986, he left political activism for more conventional journalism and also included some quite prominent work in radio and television. He came back to politics in 1998 with his book, Archaeofuturism, and this established him as quite a figure of prominence in the nationalist right. And since that time, he's maintained his independence without being wholly affiliated with any single group. In 2000, after the publication of his book, The Colonization of Europe, the French government accused him of incitement of racial hatred and fined him 300,000 francs for telling the truth about Islam. No one, I believe, has been more prescient about the forces that have been brought to bear on France than Guillaume Faye. Mr. Faye is the author of a great many books, including, besides the ones I've mentioned, Before the War, Chronicles of a Foreseeable Cataclysm, The New American Imperialism, and The Convergence of Catastrophes. His work has been translated into Italian, German, Russian, Spanish, and Greek, but never, unfortunately, into English. And so, let me present to you one of the most important voices of the French New Right, speaking for the first time in his life to a North American audience. Please welcome Guillaume Faye.
Excuse me for my quite bad English. Sometimes I shall be obliged to translate directly from the French. My dear American friends, first of all, I would like to tell you how pleased I am to have this opportunity to speak here in America today, and thanks to American Renaissance. I would like to send you warm greetings from my European friends who are fighting for the same values as you, against the same enemies, and for the same ideals. We are now at a point of history where the people from the same ethnical origin, European, American, must gather and forget our past of opposite nations or states, in opposition to the one for the others. We come from the same roots and origin. A war is beginning, like a terrible storm. A war declared against us, the white people. A world war. This is the real Third World War. I shall develop further this idea. But what I plan to summarize here is the main ideas in my two last books, The Convergence of Catastrophes and Before the War, Chronicles of a Foreseeable Cataclysm. My position may at first appear extremely pessimistic, then quite realistic, but I will end with a certain tragic optimism. What I propose may seem terrifying to some, but I think that I describe is a plausible scenario due to the convergence of a number of dramatic crises. On a global scale, world civilization, as we know now, could well collapse in 20 years. These crises continue to sharpen and aggravate each other, and they are the following: degradation of the ecosystem and climatic disruption, an increasingly fragile world economy that is vulnerable to speculation and obsessed with short-term profits, the exhaustion of fossil energy sources and other raw materials, together with agriculture and fish stocks, such that it will soon be impossible to meet the need of growth or support the meat of indefinite development. Increased nationalism and terrorism in the third world, combined with nuclear proliferation, massive uncontrolled migration from south to north, worsening of the conflict between Islam and the West. As Islam mounts a worldwide offensive that will produce a clash of civilization. Clash of civilization that our political correct elites continue to deny, of course. The demographic decline and aging populations in the rich nations, in particular in the white nations, that will result in an economic recession that has no precedent, a massive and rapid invasion of Europe by third world immigrants, accompanied by widespread Islamization that is already verging in France on what we must call ethnic civil war. The collapse everywhere in the West of the most obvious and essential moral values and their replacement by suicidal, you say suicidal in English? Like a suicide, yeah? Suicidal, cultures and behavior, the reappearance of infection, desire, etc., etc. It is the first time in our history that we have this convergence. Let me develop some of these ideas a little further. First, I would like to make clear that a catastrophe is not necessarily something negative. It is not the apocalypse. I use this word in the sense used by the French mathematician René Thom, who wrote a book, The Theory of Catastrophe. A catastrophe is a sudden change in state of a system that has been considered before stable, like our civilization, and which then plunges into chaos. A different order is then established after the chaos on a new basis. In this sense, a catastrophe is different from long-term decadence, like the Roman Empire, for example. And this is probably that will happen to us. And a catastrophe, but a catastrophe can be useful to awake. As Aristotle noted in his Politics, no society, no community can exist without a minimum of ethnic and cultural homogeneity. At present, the European nations, with France in the lead, are now undergoing a veritable substitution of population and a kind of balkanization. Our rulers are either blind or are accomplices to a process of galloping Islamization and rapid Africanization of ancient people. Here are some figures with which Americans may not be acquainted. 300,000 people come to France every year, half of them illegally, and only 5% are productive workers. There are now 6 million Muslims in France. 6 million. That is to say 10% of the population, and that figure is rising quickly. Today, one birth in three is to a Muslim woman. We are invaded not by soldiers, but by demographic invasion. If these trends continue, by the year 2020, Islam will be the largest religion in the country. 50% of the population is already of non-European origin. 30% of young people are non-European. I believe North America is also undergoing a similar shift in population. White people, as so Oswald Spengler, are ill in the mind and in the biological pattern. Never, never our civilization has lived such as a tragedy in the past 3,000 years. Our civilization, our race, is perhaps living its Untergang, as say the German, its fall. Certain be happy of this, certain others are not concerned. We must refuse these horrible fatalities because of us, because of our children. In addition to this, we have a huge decline in European birth rates, from Lisbon to Moscow, which together with the aging of our population results in what can be called ethnic suicide or a demographic winter. Germany, Italy, and Spain are already losing tens of thousands of people every year, despite immigration. This process cannot but result in a major economic collapse in all of Europe, beginning around 2015, which will have worldwide repercussions. We will see civil wars, ethnic civil wars, the very serious 3 weeks of rioting that shook France last fall are only a foretaste of what is to come. These riots resulted in 8 days. All were French natives. Hundreds of injuries and hundreds of millions of euros worth of arson damage. But these riots are good, in fact. We must applaud. My view is these riots, which shocked conventional thinkers, is that they were not all caused by poverty or racial exclusion. In fact, these populations live largely on subsidies and on racial preferences. These riots were part of a process and a strategy of ethnic and religious conquest, of deliberate colonization of Europe. The French government capitulated by granting even more subsidies and privileges to these foreign populations of rioters. This will only result in a vicious cycle of violence and increasing demands. The cost to West European economies of this immigration in terms of welfare, subsidies, and mounting crime is becoming unbearable. But we must hope that ethnic civil wars will explode and continue in Europe in order to create a consciousness and a reaction of the white people. I am for the ethnic wars. German philosopher Carl Schmitt created the concept of Ernstfall. It means the point of rupture in a crisis. And these riots are an Ernstfall. They could awake perhaps the wide combativity and the will to struggle of the Europeans. Today it is Europe, not Africa, that is the sick continent of the world. It is a super-state European Union, without political unity, without protected borders, without an economic strategy, without economic protection, with no foreign policy other than the limp-wristed cult of human rights, whose vital forces are being eaten away by immigration, with plans for the admission of Turkey into the European Union and the unchecked expansion of what is supposed to be Europe. I foresee the implosion of this superstate. A few French politicians of the right do not exclude the possibility that within a dozen of years, some of the big cities and even entire region of France, and England too, could be run by Muslims according to Sharia law. The possibility of Islamic republics, springing up in France and in other European countries has already been discussed in several American think tanks. and in publication of your Defense Department. In the Muslim world, they already have a name for this new Islamic Europe. They call it Eurabia. These ambitions are part of a vastly larger phenomenon. I have for something defended the view that the 21st century will see a general assault on the white world by people of color. Most of the time, but not always, under the banner of Islam. Expressing this view has resulted in legal charge against me and heavy fines in France, which is a country in which liberty of thought and expression are being steadily eroded. There is another unmistakable thing. This is the pathological inversion of Western and particularly European values that began in the 60s and has only grown worse. Here are some of the symptoms. A dramatic decline in the education of the young, neither knowledge nor understanding. What I call, too, ethnomasochism, or the cultivated sense of guilt regarding one's own roots, one's ethnic identity, and one's history. Xenophilia, that is to say, the systematic preference of all things that are foreign. Homophilia, or the prevalence of homosexuality over heterosexuality. The widespread acceptance of abortions of convenience. Constant encouragement of race mixing. The decline of family and hereditary lineage. Ever increasing consumption of hallucinogenic drugs. Widespread selfishness and narcissism, coupled paradoxically with the false altruism of the religion of human rights. The collapse of racial consciousness of our people, together with the resulting ethnic chaos in the West. Contempt for our roots and even for the future of our children, both of which are replaced by a sterile, I don't know, cult of the present. The collapse of the aesthetic sense and of disciplined creativity in the face of pretentious posing by imbecile. The full catalogue of our terrible spiritual decline is a lengthy one. All these pathological things of devirilization. It is English, devirilization. You are not virile. You understand? You understand emasculation. Right. Good. Emasculation. I mean confusion between women and man. There is an old Indian prophecy which say one day the kings will be robbers, the robbers king, the man woman and the woman man. This is exactly that occurs today. It is the notion of confusion. Confusion is the ultimate point of egalitarianism. Confusion. Everything is like everything. Niggers are Sweden. In France, I have made a joke in the French radio, I have demanded human rights for bonobos, monkeys, very seriously. A civilization that is approaching its end, which has given itself up to the subhuman and to the neo-primitivism concept created by Konrad Lorenz. These symptoms were evident whenever peoples of the past have moved into senility and decadence, but never are the things being too acute or so widespread as today. No human society determined to float the laws of nature can escape rapid extinction. Let me now speak about other probable catastrophes. A giant economic failure will aggravate and amplify all the other crises, and will set off this worldwide catastrophe. This assumption that growth will continue indefinitely, that worldwide GNP will expand to eliminate the gap between the rich north and the poor south, this is nothing but a bad joke. An economic system based on a free exchange, short-term speculation, and the accelerated exploitation of the world's resources simply cannot continue for much longer. We are living now as if it existed 3 Earths. You're on Earth, 3 Earths. It will not be possible for China and India to find the necessary raw materials if they continue at the current rate of development. The theory of infinite worldwide growth is an infantile myth. On top of every else will come the increasingly bitter struggle for rare resources. Even water will become a rare resource. China, which has ambition to be the primary superpower of the 21st century, and that other giant, which is India, will certainly be destabilizing forces. But the gravest threat is the third great Islamic offensive, which will be the most violent, the most far-reaching of all the destabilizing forces. Hard language. The first Islamic offensive was stopped by Charles Martel in 1732 at Poitiers, and was then pushed back during the Spanish Reconquista. The second was that of the Ottomans, which was stopped before the War of Vienna at the end of the 17th century. Thank you to the Austrian Empire. Thereafter, Islam, which is by nature a religion of terror and conquest, and which is the very point of totalitarianism, was deeply humiliated by European colonization. It is now taking revenge, and it launches its invasion of Europe and of the world. From Africa to the frontiers of China, Islam is implicated in 90% of current violent conflicts. At the same time, it is entirely possible that the state of Israel will disappear during the course of this century. Both for demographic reasons and as a result of the realignment of forces. It may be that Zionism turned out to be a kind of utopia, like communism lasted for less than a century. In any case, it is certain that an eruption is coming in the Middle East, and it will not help if Iran acquires nuclear weapons. I believe that the attacks of September in the United States, 2001, as well as those of London, Madrid, and Delhi, are nothing compared to those that are to come. My view is that the Islamists have drawn the West into a trap in Iraq, and the conflict there justifies the continued offensive elsewhere. The war on terror has been so badly conducted, the target should have been Iran, not Iraq. That it only strengthens Islamic terrorism around the world. Within the next 10 years, I predict acts of giga-terrorism, that is to say with nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. I would like to conclude my proposition several general ideas. The West has succumbed to what I would call belief in miracles. Belief in miracles. Example would be the belief that indefinite economic growth is possible despite limited natural resources. That a multiracial society has long-term prospects. That all the races are equal. That permissiveness and decadence can lead to social harmony. that Islam can lead to peace, that democracy is the solution to every world problem, that a nation can survive and remain the same with millions of foreigners from other races, that freedom is settled on lack of discipline and public order, that demography is not important, that narcissism and destruction of family links give public happiness and liberation, etc., etc. The American dramatist and ethologist Robert R. Drey has written, "Our current civilization is like an ammunition train rushing without lights through a foggy night." He too believed that we were returning to the Middle Ages. The world we are preparing for ourselves will be a jungle. Francis Fukuyama who predicted the end of history for man, in which we will all live under world government in a state of liberal democracy, is guilty to an enormous error. It is Samuel Huntington who was right to predict a clash of civilization. But I would go further. The 21st century will be far richer in explosions than the 20th century. We will live through a decline of civilization comparable to the decline of the Roman Empire, but much more rapid. Dark Ages. Iron Ages. It is too late to reverse the course. It is high time that we prepare for the chaos to come, that is to say, our renaissance. I predict the crisis will come at some point between 2010 and 2020. In the future that we are preparing for ourselves, we have to abandon the classic categories of geopolitics. For example, United States, Europe, Russia, all opposite to each other, and instead think in terms, it's a new word, of ethnopolitics. This would join all people of European origins of all continents, who will then face to other people. This is the first concept of world-wide nation. The term of nation in its Latin etymology means race. Nation is your parents. It comes from the Latin verb nascere. Nation is, in fact, a race. So the concept of white word nation. This is why I think for the Europeans the moment of anti-Americanism is finished. We must consider ourselves now as a sort of fortress, and as a sort from Russia to the United States, including Australia, of course, the same network that we have to build this network.
One united, one family.
The same nation. Of course, it will be very long that this idea come into the facts, of course. But nowadays, we must, like a tree, put the grain in the ground, this idea, in order that today we can see worldwide nation. The resources, before this. A civilization, a nation, a people resemble to a tree. You have roots, you have trunk, and you have branches and leaves. Roots is race or genetic basis. Trunk is culture. Leaves are form of culture that only the Italian word civiltà can express. When trunk is wounded, when leaves are ill, you can save the tree by medicine. Same thing for people and nation. When policy is bad, when culture is declining, when a war is losing, you can arrange the thing, even when economy is poor. But when the biological and genetic substratum is to be destroyed by race mixing or demographic collapse, everything is finished for the future centuries. No civilization can exist without its racial root and substratum. But the resources of the civilization that we hold in common are immense. We are fortunate to be a part of a metamorphic civilization, which has a biological substrate and that has always been able to regenerate itself after the crisis. Our civilization is like the phoenix, the bird that rises from the ashes. A civilization, a race, a nation who does not consider itself as superior, as above the others, is condemned and can disappear. Even the niggers consider now proudly themselves as superior, even if they are at bottom of human creativity, and even if they have forgotten that their ancestors and parents some short centuries ago lived naked in the African savannah without even knowing iron and writing. Today, the white people feel themselves everywhere in the planet guilty of everything because of the poison of egalitarianism. They have forgotten that there is a hierarchy of races and civilization, and then our race and our civilization, from the ancient Greeks to the conquests of the moon, is the more brilliant of all. But this does not mean that we are to be supremacist and that we want to dominate the others. We want to live between us, in our territory, in our Lebensraum, without no obligation with the others. The others in their territory. But no charity, no head. Do they give to the white people? No, we are not to give to them. As we say in French, chacun chez soi. Everybody in his home. For them, no more help, no more charity. I propose a revolutionary view of the future of the planet after the catastrophe, after the chaos. Earth divided in great ethnic space, completely opposed to the global world of today, of course. There is an interesting citation of the French politologist Carl Schmitt. He said that the man who has no enemies, who say, I have no enemies, can meet somebody who say to him, aber ich bin dein Feind. But I am your enemy. It is stupid to choose to have no enemy. We have an enemy. The enemy, he knows that. We don't know. And 1 century ago, Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, wrote, incredible, more than 1 century ago, yellow and black barbarity is surrounding Europe and will invade Europe. Incredible. And in history, as so Oswald Spengler, history is both a cemetery of civilization and like a theater, when peace is only a little part between wars. The future century will be an iron century, the century of metamorphosis. It is high time, it's my conclusion, to prepare for this renaissance, to think in terms of the world that is to be, one founded on principles that are precisely the opposites of those of today. Throughout history, it has always been the minority of activists that wins. We must always have in mind the slogan throughout the white world, from resistance to reconquest, from reconquest to renaissance. Thank you for your attention.
I think we owe a special thanks to Mr. Faye for speaking in a language not his own. I see we have quite a number of people prepared to ask questions, and as necessary, I will interpret your questions to Mr. Faye. Please.
Yes, there's one question yesterday from Mr. Don Root of South Africa. A little trouble with the microphone. A little too. Okay, thank you. That looking to the east, there is a wild card in this whole scheme of things, and apparently there's not a lot of talk or very much attention has been brought up to this, and that is to the nations of Central and Eastern Europe, and the wild card in this whole civilization clash. I need some kind of a comment on that one, looking to the east, to Russia and Poland and Czechoslovakia and all those countries in Eastern Europe, in the Baltics. Thank you.
Because, you know, absolutely, communism was like a block of ice, or like a sort of painting, superficial. But the roots of the mentality were not destroyed. For example, in the Soviet Union or in West Eastern countries, you can, at school, they are speaking about race, they are speaking about the old culture of East Europe. So in France, other Marxists have invaded the university. It was completely different, even if the French system was capitalistic. So communism, it's a bizarre thing, preserved the East European people in the roots. But unfortunately now, with the European Union, with the destruction, there is a destruction of the culture of the European, of the East European. For example, I saw in a Polish magazine, there is no nigger in Poland yet. I saw advertisements, incredible, with white women kissing black men. It was an advertisement for a Japanese a screen, you know. What? Why? So there is a wheel of propaganda. There is a wheel of propaganda to see these people. You are obliged to mix with nigger. You are obliged. Even if there is no nigger now in Poland, prepare yourself at the arrival of the niggers. I saw a woman. I saw an Ukrainian woman, you know, an Ukrainian woman. She said to me, "Oh, it's horrible, Ukraine, you know. I so want to live in France. I so love to live in Germany. When we Ukrainian will be in the European Union for freedom, for freedom." I say, "Yes, freedom. Be careful. Can you go after 8 o'clock in the streets in Kiev?" Yes, yes. Was it possible in the communist regime? Yes, of course, yes. If you go today in Marseille, it would be not possible. In Nice, it would be not possible. But why? Why? Because of Arabs and police. Oh, police, they are sleeping, police. So, the East European people must prepare themselves to something very hard. This is why we must implement in East Europe now circles, group. We must have now in Poland, in Ukraine, in Hungary, in these countries, there is nationalist group, but we must be in connection with them. Because the great danger is the close nationalism, you know, like the Russian nationalism, the Polish nationalism. It is a great danger. Like in Ireland, when the Catholic are fighting against the Protestant, in the same time, niggers arrive. It's exactly like the invasion of Spain, when the Visigoth kingdoms fight them against them, you know, the one against one another, and during this time there was an invasion of the Moroccos, and we must absolutely have links with all white people all over the world. I'm sorry, I must say black and no nigger, but in France it's either of us.
Hello, Mr. Faye. Lord. Welcome to the United States. Lord. My name's Eric Angie. My patronym comes from Alsace. I come from Detroit, that once great American industrial town that has now been turned over to the third worlders, part and parcel. I'm rather pessimistic about what our tribe is capable of doing to ourselves. In your opinion, is it probable that the white Europeans can put away their perhaps ancient animosities for one another long enough to Lord, rid themselves of the aliens among them?
En Europe, les Européens seront capables d'oublier les animosités d'avant pour se réunir contre les autres.
Okay. I think it begins. I think, yes, it begins with an exception concerning Poland against Germany and against Russia, or Ukraine against Russia. You know, the historic memory is very, very deep in some, unfortunately, European countries, and even in Western Europe. They consider that the immigrant invasion is not a problem, but that there is a great danger of invasion by Mr. Putin army. Mr. Putin, not army. And look, for example, in the Western Europe, the nationalist micro-movements like Euskadi, Pays Basque, how do you say in English? Basque country. Basque country, Brittany, Ireland, and they prefer the immigrants Islamic to the central government, which is white. Incredible. For example, in Spain, the Catalonian government and the Basque government want to be independent, but they say all asylum seekers coming here, all immigrants coming here, we accept them, but we don't accept Spanish. We hate Spanish. Incredible. It is the same thing in Brittany. Look, one thing incredible. You have each year in Brittany, in a camp, it's in Quimper, that's right, or Vannes, Inter-Celtic Festival. Festival of all the music Celtic of Europe. I mean, Northern England, Scotland, Brittany, and etc., etc. And there was an Austrian group who said, we are Celtic. It's true. Austria is an old Celtic country. And in the northern Italy and in Austria, there is Celtic music groups. And they say, please, can we be invited? You know, they are the same than the Scottish, the cornemuse. They are the same. No. No, said the guy. No. Because in your country there is Mr. Haider and the FPE, the party, the Freedom Party. No, you cannot. In the same time, they accepted a group from Senegal. Dum, 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 dum. Yes, yes. This is ethno-masochism, you know. They are nationalists, but only against their brothers. They are Basque, they are nationalists against Madrid, but not against Timbuktu. No. But fortunately in the Western Europe, that it's finished the apart in the English press against the French. This finished the struggle or bad memories between West Europeans. Fortunately, it's a great point. For example, between Germany and French population.
Sir, I want to preface my question by saying thank you, because your lecture touched my genes, and I know the genes of everyone in here. And really, I got a sense from your speech, you really brought upon a feeling of horror and dread in all of us, because the catastrophic destruction of our race in Europe and around the world, the prospect of biological, chemical, nuclear warfare, the incredible dissolution of our civilization, it brings us a great sense of dread and even horror. But I noticed around the room, I noticed in my own heart, also a sense of excitement rising. Because, as I said, your speech got us in contact with our genes. And the truth is, in a way, these great cataclysmic events that are coming, it gives us a sense that a great change is coming. We have the opportunity to rise and defend our heritage and restore our heritage. And truly, from the hottest furnaces is purified the finest of metals and the most precious of metals. And I believe that you and the people here are living examples of the fact that the genes of Charles Martel and the genes of Leonidas and other people who defended really our European and classical culture and genetic heritage is still alive and still flourishing in the world. Now, my specific question is, as a student of history, you know that the earlier Islamic invasions of Europe, that in part a great deal of the problem came from internal subversion. As you know, the gates of Constantinople were opened by another non-European minority inside that community. In fact, the gates of Granada were opened. This is historical fact, by another, in fact, Middle Eastern community. There is a power in the world that dominates our media, influences our government, and has led us to this internal destruction of our will and our spirit. I'm not going to say it. That's not this convention. Listen, I'm trying to say something else here if you give me a chance to finish. And I've certainly been polite to everyone, and you can...
Yes, I'm being polite to you. The door's that way. I'm going that way, don't worry.
Do you have a question?
Yes, my question is this.
I'm not seeing you disgrace this meeting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. All right, listen. Look, I'm not trying to cause controversy. I have a legitimate question, and I've tried to say it as politely as I possibly can. I don't consider myself an enemy of all people of that persuasion.
Do you have a question?
Yes, my question is simply this. How do you think it's just as vitally important, if we're concentrating on the Islamic community around the world, do you think it's just as important, maybe even more so important, to defend our own ranks in Europe and around the world, and to clean out those who are controlling our media, controlling our government, who've betrayed the West and opened our gates, just as they opened the gates of immigration today?
A very interesting question. Of course, when you are ill, you must combat the virus. The Jewish question is, it would be like a conference to speak about this. There is in Europe certain laws that forbid absolutely you to speak about the Jews, exactly as during the First World War you would attack in red trousers like did the French troops, for example. But you must say a certain number of things. You cannot directly speak about the Jews as a cause of all arrived to us. But worse than the Jews are the people which are we say in French, enjuivés. How do you say that? They are Jews in the mind, if you want. They are Jews in the mind. Like, for example, the Catholic Church of France, which is officially for a massive immigration, for a massive opening of the borders. And now in Western Europe, there is something interesting. It is that the Jewish community, intellectual thinkers, intellectual Jewish community is beginning to be awake of, well, the Arabs arrive and attack the Jews in France. It's horrible. So they change completely their mind. One Jewish French thinker, Mr. Finkelkraut, Jewish thinker, Mr. Finkelkraut, living in France, has made an interview to the Haaretz Israeli newspaper, saying things exactly the same that Mr. Le Pen. It's horrible, we invaded 2 blacks, and so. Then after, he apologized. He apologized. No, I not say that. No. It is a proof that in the Jewish community there is a separation. They began to be awake. I should say that the danger of the Jew is not the same as the danger of the Arabs. The Jews is the man who have, you will translate this in English, l'homme qui a ouvert les vannes du barrage.
Opened up the
doors.
hole in the dike.
Yes. And water are immigration. But of course, we must fight on 2 fronts, but not with the same means, because you go in jail immediately in France, for example, if you criticize the Jews. And last thing, in the United States, the Jews are very good in foreign policy. The United States is dominated by Jewish foreign policy, banks and etc. Money. In France and in Germany is different. It is TV, medias, newspaper, university, medicine, but no great firms, no great companies, no great banks, no, but only which is in the brain of the people. So it's, of course, the very cause is the Jewish mentality and the human rights mentality, and to a certain Christianism. But we must be very prudent by saying this sort of thing.
Next question.
I'm here today to counsel coolness and perhaps more careful assessment of the situation. Because the bottom line is we are in great danger of doing the dirty work for the people in the 3rd ring of a circus. The first ring, you might say, is the Western nation. The 2nd ring is Islam, and I certainly don't want to defend their aggressiveness. But in the 3rd ring have been a number of people who have been much more aggressive over the last 30 years at least in destroying our national consciousness for French, English, German, and even Americans, for destroying our history, for destroying our cultures, our religion. I just talked to a teacher who confirmed once again our children are not allowed to sing patriotic songs in the schools anymore. So here's an enemy who, if we really agree to fight against Islam, would be the great benefit and in fact might stab us in the back. Do you have any comment on that?
Ouais, c'était à peu près la même question. Il veut dire si on se combat contre les islamiques, les juifs en profiteront. Si on se combat contre les islamiques, c'est les juifs qui vont en tirer profit.
I don't think so. I don't think that the Jewish, because now in Western Europe, the Jewish population, they are completely astonished to see themselves attacked by the Arabs in Europe. The Jews are good tacticians, but they have always a bad strategy. They do too much, always too much, you know. They believe it will be possible in France and in Germany to admit a great number of of Muslims. They believe it will be possible for them. They believe they were not attacked, but they are attacked. In fact, they are attacked. They are really attacked by the Muslims. They believe it could be like in Palestine. No. Even in Palestine, I think the Jewish will lose the war. It's true, they will lose the war. This is why I say that we must be very acute in our struggle. The best thing is not to speak about the Jews. I never speak. They don't exist. For me, they are like the Eskimo. They are like this thing. I was invited by the Jewish Congress of French Parliament, and it was extraordinary. They say, what do you think about the Jews? Oh, poor little people. But we dominate the earth. No, you don't dominate the earth. No, the great French monks are not Jews. You are not Jews. You are nothing. You are a little people, a poor little people. Of course, I didn't thought this. But they were completely amazed, completely astonished. And I say to them, in the 21st century, do you think that the enormous mass of Chinese, enormous mass of Indians, they don't know what Jews means? So I think our chance, it is the end of the Jewish world. It is the end of the Jewish mind domination. And if we say that, it will arrive. We have no to be always obsessed by the Jew. Jewish, connais pas.
I agree with most of your speech, but not with your answer. Coming from the country where a simple bricklayer who wrote non-threatening, non-published letters to politicians and newspapers can be sentenced to 2 years in jail. There's something drastically wrong here. Thank you.
Yes, I understand. Yes.
Très formidable. Bravo.
Thank you very much.
Usually, a PhD is a pretty obscure speaker. But your talk was incredibly lucid, and I think you helped provide us with some vocabulary to deal with phenomena. I particularly like your term xenophile, and your term ethnomasochists. These are very good. But I have a very brief question. Obviously, the implosion of the birth rate in Europe and to a certain extent in North America is catastrophic. Do any European governments have any programs to try to encourage more births among their population?
Only in France and in Ireland. They are completely blind elsewhere. Blind. They are completely blind. They are only obsessed by their own re-election and by economic statistics. And in Russia, Mr. Putin in Russia abolished the communist law on abortion and gave money to the family with more than 2 children. In France, they encourage natality, but it's perverse because they encourage the natality of immigrants. And for example, there is families from Africa with 50 children. 50 children! 7 women. French state say nothing. Good, they are children. No, they are not children, they are négrillons.
Merci beaucoup.
George Soros and a bunch of NGOs went to Russia and they were encouraging them to bring in, I guess illegal aliens to replace the workers there. But I understand Russia's now starting a program for growth to make their population replace its own self. But I got one question for you here. I'm in construction business, and there's a gentleman that I do his building every year. His name is Lincoln, but he's a Brazilian. And he says to me, I said, well, what do you think the situation there as Brazil continues to grow? And he said, well, everybody wants to come to America because, he said, you look in the World Almanac and it has the figure 752. That means that they make nothing in those countries. He said, so Europe, because Europe is losing its population, over the next 25 years, Europe will have to import about 500 million people from Africa and the Arab countries to replace their people. And eventually the whites will become just a part of the tribal group there. What do you think about that situation?
Il dit qu'en Europe, il avait parlé avec un Brésilien. Et le Brésilien, ce qu'il pense sur l'Europe, c'est que parce qu'il y a une baisse de population en Europe, les Européens seront obligés d'importer 1 milliard de personnes pour remplacer.
This is completely false. Look, Japan is losing its population. There is no immigrants in Japan. The solution is not to import population, but to grow the race of the natives, to stimulate the demography of the natives. Why? Because we say we are importing Indian, Pakistan, African population because we are no sufficient number of white youngs. But we imported not able people, des incapables, comme on dit. Handicapped people for work. In France, those we enter in France, only 5% are workers. And what sort of workers? Engineers? No. Pilots of plane? No. People on the street to make holes.
I'd like to say one more thing about the media.
Let the gentleman, we're over our time now.
Yes, last question.
We need to give us back one TV station.
Last question, yes, thank you.
Let me first strike a dissident note here.
Could you ask a question, please? We don't have much time.
It seems to me that if we had what a lot of people in this room want, well, let me back up. It seems to me that Europe in the 60s and into the 70s was what a lot of people in this room think is the solution. It was they were a collection of homogeneous nations. And they, as it were, through some kind of spiritual failure, some kind of cultural innovation, they invited the racial problem on themselves. That tells me that there's something deeper that's wrong with Western man. That it's really not about Jews, it's not about blacks, or anything else. Well, no, the question is.
What's the problem? Why did it happen?
The question is, if homogeneous nation and a lack of minority problems is the answer to our cultural problems, why did Europe, which already had that in the 60s and 70s, succumb?
Il a dit, selon notre point de vue à nous, l'Europe dans les années 60, 70, c'était des nations homogènes. Ils n'avaient pas de problèmes raciaux comme nous. Alors pourquoi les Européens ont invité ça? Est-ce que ça reflète une malaise spirituelle ou quoi?
Yes, you are right. It is because of a sort of illness in the mind. This is a growing of an ideology, and beneath this ideology, of course, there is the Jewish thinkers, but there was too the Catholic churches and the Protestant churches. In the 60s, there was a sort of rupture in the mentality. After, in France, the Marxist revolution of May 68, from before the 60s, a country like France was 100% white, 100%. Then came the Algeria war, and immigration from Algeria, and immigration from ancient colonies. And it's the same in the country without colonies, like, for example, Italy and Germany, because in the 16th, there was a sort of rupture in the mentality. And our work, not only in France, not only in the United States, but in Russia, in Poland, in Argentina, everywhere in the world, is to be the, comment on dit les médecins?
A doctor? A médecin?
Médecin.
A médecin? A doctor.
We are to be the doctors to save the white. We have a good mentality. But we must know that in the future struggle, we shall have to cope always with our brothers. The demonstrator yesterday was white. There was no black. Our enemies will be to the collaborators of the enemy. I hope you understand me. Thank you very much.